Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Neil Humphries, and I'm part of the Emergency Services Creative Arts Project. And we're going to do a podcast recording this afternoon with my very close friend and my spirit guide, if you like, in this world, the clairvoyant that I've known for, what is it, about 15 years now?
15 years or more.
Loraine
Rees.
Rees. And we're going to, in this chapter, we're going to be talking about how Loraine got into clairvoyancy and spiritualism. And so I would like to start off, Loraine, for your podcast. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hello, I'm Loraine Rees, and I've been working as a psychic spiritual medium for the last 36 years professionally.
Lovely. So I want to take you back, if I can, Loraine, to your very early life, when you was a child almost. When was the first occasion that you realised that spiritually you were different, and that an awakening of that you could contact and be aware of spiritual matters?
Well, it's a really hard one because I remember when I was maybe at the age of 4 or 5, and I would be speaking to my mum's grandmother that died when my mum was 11, and she would tell me about her past and how she lived in the north of England, and she showed me trains and she used to visit me overnight. And I remember one morning I woke up and I said to my mum, I said, I've got a friend called Lucy. And she went, right. And my mum said, so who's Lucy? I said, I don't really know, but she used to work with trains with steam coming out of them, smoke. And my mum looked at me and she went, oh dear, and just walked off and done the washing up. And then a few years later, I was talking to my mum again about Lucy, and then my mum said, "Well, that is my grandmother that died when I was 11, and her father used to, and her brother Tom." Tom Carter, they were the first people to do the locomotive train from Liverpool down to London. And so my mum was quite amused by what I was picking up.
And how old were you then?
Well, I think the first time Mum said, because obviously I was a child, and she said I was about 4 or 5 the first time. But I remember having the conversation when I was about 8 or 9, and I remember it clearly because I was in hospital and I got burnt with hot water, and they kept me in. And so when Mum come and visited me, and she said, "Oh, I hope you've not been lonely." And I was telling her that Lucy comes to see me all the time.
Yeah, and did she tell you at that time who Lucy
Yeah,
was?
when I was in the hospital. So I remember I was about 8 or 9, and then I remember my mum saying, "Oh, well, when you was born, your granddad, Bill's sister Jess, looked at you and said to my mum, she said, Maureen, that this one has got the gift." Because Jess was a very well-known clairvoyant back in the 60s and 70s, even before that in the UK.
Hmm. And was your mum gifted at all?
Yeah, my mum was very gifted, but she never practiced. And you also, believe it or not, my father as well. He had many encounters with the spirit world. So I feel it come from both sides.
So what was your father's encounters with the spirit world?
Well, my dad, unfortunately, when I was born, he was blind. He was part of the security team that got done by a well-known convict at London Hospital, and they sprayed some substance in his eyes, and so he couldn't see. And for the first few months of my life, he couldn't see. But he was saying that when he couldn't see, he was channeling his grandfather that died many years before this, and his grandfather told him, "It's all right, Henry, you will see again," even though the hospital didn't. The hospital doctor said that he wasn't going to see again. They picked up his grandfather and said, "Yes, you will see, Henry." And 7 months later, my dad had full eyesight back.
Okay. So from that early exposure in your childhood, when did you start to develop your spiritual connections?
Well, I was a bit of a clown at school, really, to be quite honest, and never
Where
very
did you go to school?
in Dagenham in Essex in the UK for people that are not aware of it. And it was okay. It was on the outskirts of London. It was quite nice growing up. But yeah, it was just a normal comprehensive school, and I wasn't really academically that bright at all. But I was funny, and I was popular. Too much so, really. My mum would have said. But I remember, like, when your friends talk to you, and they say, "Oh, I really want to go out with Peter Martin." And I would say, "No, he's not going to ask you out. He's going to ask so and so out," and it happened. And so in the end, they used to always come to me, "Do you think I've got a chance, Loraine?" And I'm like, well, if I fancied them, I would say no. But anyway, that was me going in with an ego. But then one day, particularly, I was about 14, 15, and I could see a lot of spirits in fire. And I don't quite know the technical term, what's that's called, fire gazing maybe. And anyway, we was working with the Bunsen burners, so I was working with one of my friends at school, Alison, and we lit the Bunsen burner, and I looked into it, and I could see her mum dead. So I wasn't very tactful. So I said to her, I said, "Oh, your mum's dead." She went, "No, she's not." And anyway, so I just thought, okay, but I could honestly see her dead. And so we didn't see Alison for 3 weeks, because when she got home, she found out her mum died about 2 o'clock that afternoon, and so I thought maybe then I needed to be a bit more tactful.
Yeah.
So that wasn't quite a great thing, but I was a child really. And back then, things wasn't really talked about. New Age really wasn't that well known. And so, it was just quite an interesting time. So, and yeah, so that's where really it all began, really. So then I didn't used to read tarot, because I didn't know what tarot was. But my father used to play with just normal playing cards, and I would, when you're playing that game, Patience, is it?
Mm.
So I shuffle the cards and lay down the cards, and I'm thinking, oh, that's going to happen because of that. So obviously, I was reading the playing cards through spirit, which I understand now. And I remember that I was said to my dad, "Oh, be careful because you're going to have an accident." And he said, "What on earth are you on about?" And a week or so later, he was a lorry driver at that time. He went into the back of another car. So yeah,
So that was your first realization
that's my
that
first.
you could predict things. Very interesting. So what was, you say about your school life, were you academic at all?
No, no, not at all.
And did you have a kind of what is recognized now as a disability?
Probably, maybe. Um,
He was a bit dyslexic.
yeah, maybe I was quite dyslexic. Maybe I just didn't feel the importance of it, I think, really,
Ah,
because I really feel looking back that maybe that academic path wasn't really on my pathway.
amazing. Okay. So when was the first realization after that you thought, well, I have obviously got this connection and I want to develop it further. So what was the next steps, if you like?
Oh, that's really hard because obviously I left school. got married quite young to my first husband, and then I had children. So, but we was living, and then we moved to Tenerife when I was about 25-ish. And so it was quite a long time between school, but I was always seeing and feeling things, but never really used it.
Mhm.
And then when I was living in Tenerife,
What were you doing in Tenerife,
well,
if you don't mind me
yeah,
asking?
my ex-husband was the professional musician, and so his band took hold of a residence over there, and so he was over there for a while. And I just made some friends. Didn't have many friends there because of having the kids. But one day we was all talking about tarot cards, and I said, "Well, I can read the playing cards," and it just come out of my mouth, and I'm thinking, "What did I just say?"
Yeah,
And so there was a group of us gals. We all had young kids, and we was just sitting in like the poolside area, and so one at a time, I started reading their cards, but then I started channeling their people that have passed over. And they're like, "Wow, how on earth did you know that?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know, but I just know."
yeah.
But my guide Ramos, which he's been around me, which I realise now all the time, although I never really channeled him until I was in my 20s,
Right.
to be very honest, because it was a bit of a cliche because being brought up in the 60s, 70s, we were still under the umbrella of, the Bible saying, "Do not go and see a fortune teller," and all this kind of thing. So it was a little bit like, "Are we playing about with the devil?" It was very, a strange time growing up in the 60s, 70s, and then getting into the 80s and people exploring a lot more. This is when I feel I really then started to channel my guide a lot more.
Okay. So you've introduced Ramos. Can
Uh
can
huh.
you can you explain to our listeners? You've said about Ramos. Who he's your spirit guide. Would you like to say what he's told
Okay.
you about his background?
Yeah, okay. So Ramos, he comes from the first kingdom of the pharaohs. He wasn't actually a pharaoh, but he was related. He was very much the right eye and man of Ramesses III, and he was one of the pharaohs that was very kind of disfigured through all the interbreeding. And so basically, he did run Egypt on behalf of this young king. And Sir Ramos, he dates back, he's had many lives. I've asked him before, but this is another subject. He's had many lives. But, his last earthly life, he was the right hand man of the king.
And what was the king's name?
Ramesses III, and he was the last of the first kingdom, and then you go into the second phase. So I've been told of pharaohs. So anyway, so Ramos was very, very much a forthright person, and he's almost somebody that's got a lot of passion. I feel his energy is quite passion and quite caring, although he can be quite firm and quite strict and a bit bossy, but I take it it's because he's a man. But anyway, so disrespects. but but going back to Ramos, a little interesting situation happened. I actually went to a place in Egypt and we took a trip to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo.
Yeah.
And anyway, so all I was interested in was going to see Ramesses III. Anyway, so got to the museum and that part of it's all closed down because they was doing some work. And I was really disappointed. I'm thinking, well, you know what? That was quite a disappointment. Had the kids in this minibus, we all, And on the way back, the driver said, "Do you mind if we pick up my friend? He's got to come back to Taba." I said, "No, there's room. Pick him up. That's not a problem." It turns out to be, what do they call it when they're all into Egyptology? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, is that?
An
Yeah.
Egyptologist.
So
Yeah.
anyway, so we got chatting, and he said, "How did you enjoy the museum?" And my then husband said, well, she was a bit disappointed because she wanted to know something about Ramesses the Third. And so he said, what would you like to know? And I said, well, what can you tell me? And then he basically told me that Ramesses the Third was the king that was badly disfigured, which I knew already, and that Ramos actually ran the kingdom. And I'm like, okay. So at this stage, everyone, like my children, all know about Ramos, and they were like gobsmacked. They're all like, yeah, tell us more. And apparently, he lived to 103 earthly years. Yeah,
And that was, in those times, it
very
was
old.
very
Yes,
old in those times,
yes.
and has seen a lot of life.
He saw a lot of life. Yes.
Okay, that's amazing. Thank you. So, um, obviously, you've gone from then, and there's a realization that you've got this connection. What do you do about it next?
Well, I then had really bad circumstances around me. I had to, for my own safety and my children's safety, leave Tenerife. And so I turn up just before Christmas, about a week before Christmas, and very heavily pregnant with my fifth child. Wasn't really allowed to fly, but the doctor forged the document so I could fly back home because he feared for my life and my safety. And so I got back home. I had nowhere to live, nowhere to stay. Mum put me up, and on the 6th of January, I gave birth to my fifth child, Billy. And we were basically quite homeless. Well, we was homeless, other than the fact I was staying with my mum and dad. And to cut a long story short, I managed to find somewhere to live for me and the children, and then it was quite difficult. And then when I was woke up one night, Ramos was there, and he just said to me, "So what are you gonna do?" And I remember he stared right into my soul, and I was scared because not scared of him, but scared because I didn't know what I was going to do. And he just said to me, "Well, you've got your gift that you was born with.
Mm.
You're gonna have to use it." And so it was almost like it was a bad time, but I think Spirit needed me to be at that place so then I can fulfill my journey, what I was put onto the earth for this time.
Okay, so that was your sudden realization that, you know, because I know we've discussed it before, but each of us have got a lesson to learn, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
Each time we come back to this earthly plane. So it was at that point you've realised that this is a lesson you got to learn, and this is what you've got to do to fulfil that lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you do next before you to
Oh,
change your life around, if you like?
well, it was very hard because you can imagine I've got five children. I've got three children under the age of three,
Mhm.
maybe four, and two older ones that were only 8 and 10 at the time. And so I remember looking into the local paper, and there was advertising of a psychic show, psychic fair. Didn't really know what it was. So anyway, I said to Mum, "Could you have the kids? I want to go and have a look at this. I want to." So she said, "Yeah, okay."
And where was it?
This was actually in Ormchurch
Yeah, yeah.
in Essex.
So not far from where you live, but it was.
Yeah, far enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I've walked in the door, and there was these people sitting around at these tables, and I just picked up a few leaflets, looked at a few crystals, and then I was drawn to this older lady called, I remember her name, Lillian. I was really drawn, and I thought, you know what, I didn't have a lot of money, but I thought I'd go and have a reading. And I think at the time it was like £10, which was quite a lot back then,
Mm.
and you haven't got it, so it was quite a lot. So anyway, I sat there, and she said, "I don't know why you're sitting with me. You should be doing me a reading." So I looked at her and I said, "Right." She said, "I will do your reading, and I won't charge you, but you need to do me a reading in return. And I went, okay. So anyway, I done her reading first, and then she done my reading. And really weird. And then when I was getting up of the table, she said, "I will see you on Thursday." I remember it being a Tuesday. I said, "Really?" She said, "My son will be in contact with you because he actually runs these fairs." She said, "I've had many readings, but nothing quite like yours." And I went, "Oh, okay." So anyway, so I remember giving her my mum's, because I didn't have a phone, my mum's number. So mum called me. I went to mum's on Wednesday, and she said, "Oh, you've got a phone call here." And there was a guy called Gary, and he said, "Would you come and do a show for us?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." So anyway, so I turned up. I only had a pack of tarot cards that someone lent me, so I didn't have anything really. So they all chipped together, really nice ladies and men, and I set up this little table. So at first I just sat there, all the others were busy because obviously they were known. And then all of a sudden I remember this girl coming up for reading off me, and she left, and she must have told many people, because before then I had about 10, 15 people queuing up, and everyone was queuing up, and I'm like, I can't do this all in one day. So I
That
remember
must have been scary at the
it was
time.
really, really scary. And so anyway, when I finished that evening, he said to me, the guy that organised it, Gary, and met him, and his cousin met him. "Well, we will see you on Monday." And I'm like, okay. So then, and that one was going to be in Kent. So I remember going over to Kent again, the same thing. And then all of a sudden, I just built up a very big following. I was very lucky. And so Ramos was right. I had to use my gift. And then things take a bit of a turn, because although I was just doing tarot readings connected with mediumship, they used to have guest speakers, and the guest speaker didn't turn up. And so they said to me, "Would you like to do a demonstration of mediumship?" I'm like, "What?" And so they said, "Well, we've got no one else." And I'm like, "Okay." So I remember, and I walked in, and this was actually in Olympia.
Yeah, yeah.
Olympia. So I'm like, "Oh no." So
One
anyway,
of these spiritual
yeah,
fairs.
yeah,
Yeah,
this
yeah,
was
I've
a
got you.
great big
Yeah,
one, because the little company then we used to go into these big ones to do bigger events. And anyway, so I remember, and people paying to come in the door, and I'm thinking, oh no. So this is my first ever show. And so, well, it went down a storm. I had a standing ovation, and I remember. But one thing about me being a clairvoyant, I actually say it at the same time. I hear it at the same time as I'm saying it, so I
okay.
don't have a lot of filter.
Yeah, I know.
And,
I've
and
been in some of those shows.
so I don't have a lot of
Yeah,
filter. But I think with my Essex girls kind of attitude, I just got away with lots.
yeah, yeah. I'm okay. So things start to sort of develop then, um, and you're getting recognised quite quickly, and it builds quite quickly.
Mm.
So when did you realise that this was going to be, if you like, your life's work going forward, and that you could earn from it, if you like, and provide from it?
Well, I think within maybe the first 2 weeks, because I just then had to get a telephone, and the phone would not stop ringing, and so when you're providing for 5 children, you just have to really do anything you can. And I remember at the time, obviously, I was still breastfeeding Billy because he was so young. So I was trying to juggle everything. And I think having a good mum really was my backbone, so I could
Mm.
do what I had to do. But sometimes, you're just so tired, but you just get this boost of energy, and that. And even if you've got your own problems, I realise working for Spirit, you leave your own problems on the doorstep, getting to work and pick them up on the way back home, and that. So
So you kind of park it for a
yeah,
little
you
while.
just park it, which I think is good, and then you deal with everybody else's problems, and then you think, oh, maybe my problem's not that bad. But to me, it felt bad before I'd done my readings and my work. Come back, doesn't feel that bad now at all.
Excellent. Okay. So things are going on for you. I think we need to talk if we can when you're actually working and you're doing a reading. Do you get visual images? Do you get like things come to you in automatically in as thoughts? How do you receive the messages?
Well, let me go back. It's changed over the years.
Okay.
Okay, so first I could just see.
Yep.
And it, obviously, I could see a lot more. And but when you're doing people's readings, just seeing is very difficult because it takes time for the vision to build. And then hearing, so clairaudient, I'm very clairaudient, so I can hear spirit. And that's how I really done the first maybe 8 or 9 years working for spirit clairaudiently. And then all of a sudden, I stopped hearing and I've stopped seeing to a certain extent, bit, but I just knew. And this is where they come and they just take over my throat chakra and just blur out the information. So it's almost like I explained before, I hear it at the same time I'm giving it to the person.
Okay.
And one thing I realised that if you do hear it and you do see it, you overanalyze it. And so I think working clairsensitively maybe is probably the best way because you haven't got time to put your own thoughts or ego into the message.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when you try to analyze what you're given, you're almost putting your myths and beliefs onto it, which is
Absolutely.
not necessarily how it's coming
Mhm.
across. And I know when I'm working with my spirit guide, it's very much all of a sudden I get a thought, this is it, and I just say it,
Mhm.
and then we've had several conversations where you say,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly,
Exactly.
and like for me, you know, from my former background being a police officer, I try and look for the evidence,
Yeah.
and for the evidence, you look for your five senses, your sight, your hearing, your taste, and everything else that will try and create an image for you or that, and you build that around it. But when you just have to say what you're getting and without that evidence, that's when you're sort of linking in.
Uh-huh. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's truly amazing. So for people that don't realise, I think that we've discussed before that most people, when they're born, will have some form of connection to spirit.
Absolutely. So when we're born, this is what I've channeled through many times through spirit, not just through my guides, but other people's loved ones when they've come in for readings, which has been quite phenomenal. That we're all born powerful. We're all born with the ability to get noticed, and all born telepathic. So, like a mother and a baby, they know when the baby's not well. They call it, and even being a detective, you call it the policeman's nose, don't you? And
A
that's
hunch.
a hunch, yeah. So
Yeah.
we've all got this. So sometimes when we get this major gut feeling, you know what, I shouldn't really trust that person, or maybe I shouldn't really do that, is because your subconscious is telling you this is all wrong.
Yeah.
And so, but everybody's born psychic. Everybody's born with the love of the source around them and the respect from the heavens to them little souls that we are on the earth. And so we've all got this, telepathic, maybe call it,
Yeah.
or channeling, whatever you want to call it. We've all been born with the ability to do this. It's only society conditions us. When we go to school, we're told we're going to write this way, but in a past life, there's something else we'll talk about another time, you might have wrote Chinese, so it's almost like we are told this is how we behave. So, for example, we're told we go to school, we get the best grades, we get a job, we get married, and then we have children, and then we repeat it with our own children. So it's just a pattern, a cycle all the time. But that's not really why we're here. The reason why we're here is not to follow suit like sheep, but be lions, be courageous, and go after our dreams and not other people's dreams that they think we should be following.
Okay. I'm going to sort of end on, if I can, on just one question that will help our listeners. What would you say for most people was the first recognition that they're spiritually minded, that they, if you like, are at the early stages of developing their own spiritual awareness?
Okay, so there's many things there that could cover. So you could get gut feelings, and you could also start seeing colours, like flickering of colours. You might feel spirit when they come close to you. Some people get a shudder, or some people might get like a feeling of a cobweb over their nose. But when you want to connect with the afterlife, which is not above us, I must tell you, then you don't pray above. They're around us, so they're on this different dimension to us, and that so we don't look to the heavens and say, oh, I want to pray to I want to ask my grandmother for this. You just say very carefully, put your hands up, palms up, and just say, I really want to connect with my grandmother, and just please guide me through this next stage. So trust spirit's going to guide you. So I would suggest that meditation would be the first key.
Yeah.
People find it really hard, as Neil would know, to learn to shut their mind off, because our mind is the most powerful tool we're ever going to possess on this earth. And so we need to kind of calm and still our mind, and that is the hardest. Once you've learned to calm and still your mind, it's a doddle.
I think that is it. And for me, as part of my journey, it's when and my spirit guide would wake me up at between 3 and 4 o'clock. Like it was almost like nights in a row. At the same time, I could almost predict when I'd be woken up and I'd go off, sit in a chair, meditate for half an hour, and think of totally nothing, and then things had come to me both in a dream or in my thought pattern and everything else.
Okay, so it's really interesting again that the times that your guide woke you up, because that's really known as clairvoyance. In clairvoyance, it's the portal times.
Yeah.
So it's where the worlds collide. So this is where spirit comes closer and we go closer. So our conscience and our subconscious, and that's what we connect when we're working with spirit. It was in the subconscious. This is where it all joins around that time. So not only I'm feeling in, Neil, when you had those alignments with your guide, that you was also probably astral traveling to another realm, another time warp, maybe. Does that make sense to you?
It does make sense, because we had a conversation recently, didn't we? Because I had a totally out of body experience where I actually woke up and I felt like I was absolutely drunk. I couldn't stand up. I was giddy. It was like I was drunk, but I hadn't had anything to drink. And some people might just say, well, that's signs of stress, but it wasn't. When we had this discussion, what did you tell me that one of my spirit guides was?
Nostradamus.
Yeah.
And I can't remember now, but yes.
an alien robot?
Oh, the alien robot, yeah. Okay, so we have got aliens as our guides, and again, alien is anything that's never lived on planet Earth. So if we when we go to another planet to visit, we would be aliens at this moment in time. So that's good. Oh yeah, yeah, I remember your alien guide. He's quite he's quite cheeky.
Yes.
Very cheeky. But yeah, so you've got a lot of work to channel and that with him. So I think that would be really good.
And I got to tell you that after that you told me that, I I had this weirdest of dreams, and I got um, given three letters, AFR, and I thought, what the hell is AFR? And it worked out. It was to do with robots.
Oh, there you go. So that's amazing. So it's double confirmation.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, spirit will give you confirmation. So again, I don't know whether any of the listeners out here have seen like 1111 or 2222 or 6655. Just not looking for it, but it just pops up. It could pop up on a number plate of a car. You might be looking at your phone and those numbers come out. And this is all the angelic realms wanting to get your attention.
Mm, that's truly amazing. So we just finish off this period
Mm.
of your development, if you like. Um, so what setbacks have you had from now? Some of the setbacks that you've had and how spirit has helped you get through them.
I think we go through life with many setbacks. It's very hard to pinpoint one or two. Maybe I've got a string of them. But with my work, I've not really had that many setbacks. With my personal life, I've had loads. My choices of relationships up to my current one, which is going all right at the moment, seems to be very much a case that they try to destroy me, they try to control me. And so I think, so I've had many disasters connected with that word love, which whatever love is, it's an emotion and it means different things to different people, my guide always tells me. But yeah, I think my biggest challenge has been relationships for myself.
And do you think that that's part of your spiritual learning journey to a certain
Yeah,
extent?
yeah, I really feel it has been because you know what? How can I relate to other people when I've not been through any sadness myself or any pain? If I had this pitch perfect life where nothing was ever a problem, that I got everything I ever manifested easy, then I think I could be, you might make you not appreciate when you do get things, and it definitely will make you a strong humanitarianist for other people. Where, in this field of work, we're working with energy. And just really before we finish off, I must say, although we channel energy from above, we also feel our clients' energy. So we are dealing with spirit energy, earthly energy, and your own energy field. So you're actually dealing with all these different energies, which can be very draining
Hmm.
physically and emotionally. And so, when you go to see a clairvoyant, and if you're lucky to have somebody that channels energy from above, remember, be truly grateful because they are putting a lot of their energy into your reading.
Okay. And I think that's a perfect note for us to end.
Thank you.
And thank you, Loraine, for your time and as always, your insight into this fascinating area.
Thank you, Neil.
And we'll be doing another podcast probably next month.
Next month, I would like to aim to maybe do two a month.
Okay.
And so, obviously time consuming and willing,
Yeah.
but if spirit allows that, and maybe on one of the podcasts I could interview you.
Okay.
Who's the deal?
Yeah. Yeah. I think some of the subjects that we've talked about that we'll be covering, so if you know about Lorraine's particular books that she's done with Dr. Mary Ross.
Yeah, that's my first book is called Love and Laughter with Spirit because it's got lots of love in it, lots of laughter, and lots of information of life after death.
And then the second one was Troubled
Yes,
Spirits.
but I was lucky enough to work with Neil and we've done some ghost walks,
And
didn't
so
we?
our next podcast is going to be about Troubled Spirits.
Absolutely.
So we look forward to speaking to you on our next podcast about Troubled Spirits. And with that, I say love and light, and thank you
And
for
keep
listening,
and keep happy.
and be happy.